You're watching the Stories That Scare channel. There is no turning back now.
Glad you could make it back for another night of true horror. Tonight, we're heading outside. If you've ever worked for a landscaping crew, you know the job isn't just mowing grass. You're often working on abandoned properties, behind old houses, deep in the woods, beside cemeteries, and in places most people never think twice about. These are 3 more landscaping crew horror stories. Story 1, The Property Line. I spent 3 summers working for a landscaping company while I was in college. Most days were exactly what you'd expect. We mowed lawns, trimmed hedges, spread mulch, and tried not to melt in the 100-degree Texas heat. One Thursday morning, my boss told us we had an unusual job. An elderly woman owned several acres just outside a tiny rural town. She wanted years of overgrown brush cleared away behind her farmhouse. She was planning to sell the property, and the back half looked more like a forest than a yard. There were 4 of us on the crew that day. My boss, Rick, my coworker, Danny, another guy named Luis, and me. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the old woman was already waiting on the porch. She had to be in her 80s, thin, gray hair tied into a neat little bun. She smiled politely as we walked over. "I appreciate y'all coming," she said. "Just one thing." She pointed toward the woods behind the house. "Don't cross the old property line." Rick looked around. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Where exactly is it?" She stared toward the trees for several seconds before answering. "You'll know it when you see it." None of us really knew what to make of that. Rick chuckled. "Don't worry, we'll stay where we're supposed to." The old woman didn't laugh. Instead, she quietly added, "My husband crossed it once. He was never quite the same after that." For just a second, nobody said a word. Then Rick thanked her, grabbed his weed eater, and we got to work. At first, the job was completely normal. The 4 of us spread out across the property, cutting waist-high grass, hacking through thorny brush, and feeding piles of limbs into the chipper. The July sun beat down so hard you could feel the heat radiating back up from the ground. Within an hour, we were all drenched in sweat. As we worked farther behind the house, the yard slowly disappeared. The neatly mowed grass gave way to tangled vines, towering oak trees, and thick patches of brush that hadn't been touched in years. Every so often I'd glance back toward the farmhouse. It looked much farther away than it should have. Around lunchtime, Danny yelled over the sound of his weed eater. "Hey! You see this?" We walked over. Buried beneath the vines was a row of old stones sticking a few inches out of the ground. Not gravestones, just rough pieces of limestone standing upright in a perfectly straight line. Rick shrugged. "Probably an old fence." Danny smirked. "Or maybe that's her spooky property line." He stepped over the stones with an exaggerated grin. "There! I survived." Luis laughed. Rick rolled his eyes. "Quit screwing around and get back to work." Danny fired up his weed eater and disappeared into the brush on the other side. That's when mine died. It didn't sputter. It didn't run out of gas. It just stopped. I pulled the starter cord. Nothing. Rick walked over. "Out of fuel?" "No." He checked it himself. "Full tank." He gave the cord a few hard pulls. Nothing. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, we heard another weed eater. It sounded exactly like ours. Same engine, same throttle, same rhythm. Rick looked toward the trees. "Danny!" No answer. Only the sound of someone trimming farther and farther away. Luis frowned. "He's getting pretty deep in there." Rick shook his head. "No, that ain't him." The voice came from behind us. "What ain't me?" We spun around. Danny was standing on our side of the stone markers. His weed eater hung silent at his side. His face had gone pale. "I shut mine off 5 minutes ago." Nobody spoke, because the sound was still going somewhere beyond the old property line. Then, without warning, it stopped. The woods became so quiet that all we could hear was the wind moving through the leaves. Danny swallowed hard. "I think we should finish somewhere else." For the first time that day, nobody laughed at the old woman's warning. Story 2, Breakdown at the Cemetery. About 5 years after the property line incident, I was working for a different landscaping company. This crew mainly handled commercial contracts, office buildings, apartment complexes, churches, and, every now and then, cemeteries. I'll admit, I never liked those jobs. Not because I was afraid of ghosts. It was because cemeteries were always unnaturally quiet, even when you had 6 or 7 commercial mowers running. It somehow still felt silent. This particular cemetery sat on the outskirts of a small town. Hundreds of old headstones, massive oak trees draped with Spanish moss, a narrow asphalt road that wound through the graves. We spent nearly the entire day mowing, edging sidewalks, trimming around monuments, and blowing grass clippings off the roads. By the time we finished, the sun was already hanging low in the sky. Everyone was exhausted. We loaded the zero-turn mowers onto the trailer, strapped everything down, and climbed into the trucks. Our foreman turned the key. Nothing. He tried again. The engine cranked, then died. "Great," he muttered. He climbed out and lifted the hood. After a few minutes of checking everything, he figured the battery cable had worked itself loose. Simple fix. Or at least it should have been. While 2 of the guys worked under the hood, the rest of us leaned against the trailer, drinking warm bottles of water and watching the sun slowly disappear behind the trees. That's when one of my coworkers quietly asked, "Who's cutting grass?" None of us answered because we all heard it. Not a commercial mower, not a weed eater. An old-fashioned push mower, the kind with spinning metal blades that click, 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 as they're pushed across the ground. The sound was coming from somewhere deeper inside the cemetery. Slow, steady, almost rhythmic. Click, click, click. We all turned toward the sound. About 70 yards away, an elderly man was slowly pushing one of those old reel mowers between the headstones. He wore faded blue coveralls, a dirty straw hat. His back was slightly hunched as he walked. Click, click, click. The strange part wasn't that he was mowing. It was where he was mowing. There wasn't any grass, only patches of dirt, gravel, and weathered headstones. Yet he continued pushing that mower as if he couldn't see the difference. Our foreman looked up from under the hood. "Y'all see that?" Every one of us nodded. One of the guys yelled, "Sir!" "You all right?" The old man never looked up, never waved, never even slowed down. He just kept walking. Click, click, click. Our foreman shrugged. Probably the groundskeeper. He tightened the battery cable and slammed the hood shut. "Let's get out of here." The truck fired right up. As we pulled onto the cemetery road, we drove directly toward where the old man had been. Only he wasn't there anymore. There wasn't another road. No trees thick enough to hide behind. No maintenance building. Nothing. Just rows of headstones stretching across the hill. One of the crew laughed nervously. "He moves pretty fast for an old guy." Nobody else laughed. We stopped near the front gate where an older woman was locking it for the evening. Our foreman rolled down his window. "Excuse me, ma'am? Who's your groundskeeper?" She gave him a puzzled look. "What groundskeeper?" "The older gentleman with the reel mower." Her expression changed immediately. She slowly shook her head. "We haven't had a groundskeeper here since Mr. Collins. He passed away almost 20 years ago. And," she glanced back toward the cemetery, "he always used one of those old push mowers." The truck went completely silent. Nobody said another word for the entire drive back to the shop. The next morning, while unloading equipment, one of the guys found something wedged between the trailer rails. An old leather work glove, cracked with age, still damp with fresh grass clippings. None of us owned a glove like that. None of us had ever seen it before. Our foreman quietly picked it up, walked to the dumpster, then stopped. Instead, he carried it back to the cemetery that afternoon. When he returned, he looked at us and simply said, "I figured it belonged to somebody. We never had another problem at that cemetery, but every now and then, right before quitting time, someone would swear they could hear click, 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 coming from somewhere beyond the rows of old headstones." Story 3, the new guy. Landscaping crews have a lot of turnover. Guys quit. New people get hired. Someone's cousin shows up needing work. So, seeing a face you don't recognize usually isn't a big deal. That's exactly why none of us questioned him. It was a Monday morning. We were loading mowers, weed eaters, gas cans, and backpacks into the trailers before daylight. When I pulled into the shop, There was already a man helping everyone load equipment. He looked like he'd been doing landscaping his whole life. Mid-50s. Sun-weathered skin. Gray work shirt tucked into faded jeans. Brown work boots covered in dried mud. The first thing I noticed was that he seemed to know everyone. "Morning, Tyler. How's your little girl feeling?" Tyler smiled. "She's finally over that fever." A few minutes later, he looked at another guy. "Chris, don't forget your pruning saw this time." Chris laughed. "Man, I left that thing on a job 2 weeks ago." Then he looked at me. "You must be Jacob." I nodded. "Yeah." He smiled. "Heard you're the fastest guy on a weed eater." I figured my foreman must have told him. It wasn't until we reached the job site that things started getting strange. Without asking anyone, he grabbed exactly the right equipment. He knew which trailer latch always stuck, which backpack blower leaked a little gas, which zero-turn mower pulled slightly to the left. He even reminded our foreman. "Don't forget Mrs. Peterson doesn't like grass blown into her flower beds." The weird part? It was our very first time working for Mrs. Peterson. None of us had ever been to that property before. Around lunchtime, the foreman finally asked, "So, how long you been with the company?" The man looked up from sharpening hedge trimmers. He smiled. "A long time." That was it. No explanation. Just a long time. Nobody pressed him. I think everyone assumed somebody else had already met him. And that's probably what he wanted. The afternoon went by without another word about it. If anything, the new guy worked harder than the rest of us. He never took a break. Never stopped for water. Never even wiped the sweat from his face. He just kept moving, mowing, edging, trimming. It was almost like he already knew exactly what needed to be done before anyone gave him instructions. When the last trailer was loaded, we headed back to the shop. As everyone was putting equipment away, our foreman walked into the office to finish payroll. A few minutes later, he came back out looking confused. He asked, "Hey, who's the new guy?" Everyone pointed toward the trailer, except there was nobody there. We looked around the shop, behind the trucks, inside the warehouse. Nothing. One of the guys shrugged. "He probably left." The foreman frowned. "Left in what?" We all stopped. None of us could remember seeing a vehicle. He hadn't ridden with anyone. He hadn't driven a company truck. In fact, none of us could remember how he'd gotten there in the first place. Our foreman walked back into the office and checked the employee roster. No new hires, no temporary workers, no contractors, nothing. He even called the owner. "Nope," the owner said. "I didn't hire anybody." Thinking someone was playing a joke, we pulled up the security camera footage from that morning. The video showed each truck arriving one by one. Tyler, Chris, me, the foreman, every member of the crew. But there was one problem. There was never anyone standing in the parking lot helping us unload. Every time one of us carried equipment toward the trailer, it looked like we were handing it to thin air. The trailer doors opened by themselves. Gas cans seemed to slide into place. One mower ramp folded shut with nobody touching it. Yet every single one of us clearly remembered talking to him, laughing with him, working beside him all day. The owner refused to believe it until Chris quietly asked, "Roll the video back to when he talked to me." The owner did. Chris stared at the screen. His face slowly lost all its color, because, on the recording, he was standing alone, laughing, answering questions, to absolutely no one. A week later, one of the older mechanics overheard us talking about it. He didn't seem surprised. He simply nodded. "You boys finally met Walter." We looked at him. "Who's Walter?" The mechanic smiled sadly. "He worked here for nearly 40 years. Best landscaper I ever knew. He knew every customer by name, every broken mower, every shortcut, every employee. He died loading trailers one Monday morning." The mechanic pointed toward the exact spot where we'd first seen the man. Then he quietly said, "Guess he's still making sure the new guys do things right." Well, those were 3 more landscaping crew horror stories. Which one got under your skin the most? The property line, the cemetery, or the new guy who never really worked there? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the STS Club. Until next time. I'll tell the stories. If you'll stay scared,